Hello and welcome. My name is Juan Ramirez. I'm a lead solutions architect with OutSystems. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to add a workflow to an existing application using OutSystems Developer Cloud. In Odyssey, we have a couple of development assets that you're going to be working with. You have your applications, you have your libraries, and now we're introducing workflows. And workflow in Odyssey, well, basically you will use it to solve a business process or encapsulate some repeatable actions that you want to perform. But there's a couple technical things that are important to understand. First of all, they are independent from an application by definition, and that means they're loosely coupled from an application. They have independent life cycles, they have their revisions, and each revision has its own runtime. And they scale independently from applications. So that means that the workflow, whenever it's published and compiled, it's going to be running in its own container, and it's going to be, scaled independently from your applications. And this could be used to, to do approvals or, to have human activities with automated tasks that you need to perform to integrate, multiple systems in a repeatable business process. So because workflows are their own object, there are only weak references allowed between workflows and the application. So the way a workflow will communicate with an application or interact with an application is through a couple of things, right? First one is consuming events that are raised from an application. And secondly, whenever the workflow needs to talk to an application or consume or do something, it will either be consuming a service action, consuming a role, or consuming a screen that you define in your application as a public element. So in our example today, we have an expense application that we want to build the business process around it. An employee will submit an expense request. It will go to a manager, will review the information. There's some business logic. Once they accept, the request as it's completed, if it's over $1,000, it's going to go through a financial approval, which then make a decision. And lastly, it will go to an ERP, an external system, which payment will be sent and paid to the employee, and the process will finish. So how do we implement this? We're going to implement this particular example in our video today. So let's go to OutSystems Developer Cloud and look at the expense application. So in here you see that I have a screen, a very simple application to track expense requests, and we have taken the liberty of defining some events that are going to be consumed from the workflow. So we have when the expense is accepted, when the payment is received. There's a couple of that we define, and we have also defined service actions that are going to be used by the workflow to interact with the application. So let's start building the workflow. So let's go out into OutSystems Developer Cloud. Let's navigate into the workflow, and let's go ahead and create a workflow, which will bring up the editor so we can start building that particular workflow. I'm going to call it expense workflow. Can put an icon. I'm just going to use the same icon of the application. I'm going to call it manage expenses. I'm going to create and bring up the canvas. Notice that there's a start event, which will be, started by an event, right? So we're gonna select the expense application, and we're gonna select the submitted event. So whenever in the application we submit an event, we raise that event, and we're gonna kick off that process here. I'm gonna put a label here that is gonna help me identify this particular, instance of the application within the log. So I'm just gonna say, hey, this is the expense ID, of that particular workflow instance. Now you can add a description. Okay. Second step, if I look at the workflow, is the manager is going to actually review that particular state. So I'm going to select human activity, give it a name, manager review. You can add a description if you want. Notice that there's the ability to assign that to a user or a role. So in this particular case, it's going to be the manager of the particular employee or the manager selected within the application. So I don't have that information here, I don't have any data. So we're going to use the fetch more data option. I'm going to look for my expense application, and I'm going to look for my service action that's saying, hey, go out and select the manager for that particular expense ID. And I know that is the expense ID that was raised in an event for starting that instance of the process. So now that we have that, if I look at the user, I get that user ID coming back from that action, and I can use that particular user as the one to be assigned to that to a particular activity. Now notice that there's a close on option, so I'm gonna close that particular activity whenever an event is raised within the application that the manager has accepted that particular expense. And it's important to set up the condition where the expense ID matches the actual expense ID of that particular instance. As we're going to have multiple instances of this workflow, running, we have to identify, hey, this is the expense ID that was actually accepted, within here. You have the option also to select a screen which will drive this activity. On the screen, it's going to be, the expense detail, and you can put a message to the display. Provide some, some information to the user whenever. All right, perfect. So if we continue the process, we're gonna add a decision tree here. So we know that we have that option if the value is over $1,000, or it requires financial approval, basically. So in our workflow, we're gonna do a decision. And there's two outcomes, requires financial approval, yes, or no, or no, the outcome below. And then you have a condition. So we're gonna do and fetch more data, and we're gonna call the application, and say, hey, do we need financial review or not? So we can call that service action, check for financial review. That's in the expense ID. And that service action will return, yes or no. So we can check the condition. So look at the decision. Service check for finance review if requires approval equals true. We go to the path of requiring financial approval, or if not, then we go the other way. All right, perfect. So let's go ahead and select a human activity as finance review. Or approval, however you want to call that. We're gonna, instead of assigning a user in this case, we are gonna use a role, and we have exposed a role in our app called finance approver. So now the employees that have that particular role can actually approve or reject this particular item. So we're good. We got that. Let's select our screen, expense detail, pass in the value. Perfect. You can set up a comment. We'll reject, document our process, and then we're going to close on a particular event, which is called finance review completed. So the application on the other side, whenever we approve or reject, is going to erase this event and it's going to be completed. And let's make sure that we set up the condition at the bottom where the expense ID equals our expense ID. Right. So we're good there. So now we have a decision to make if it's approve or reject. Okay, we're gonna call our app, make sure that we check the status of the app, pass in the expense ID, and notice the status ID is coming back. So I can say approve with a condition if the status ID different than, so in this case rejected, right? Okay, and if it's approved, then we want to go back to our previous step, which is, I call it decision. Let me change this name to requires. So if we approve if the finance review approves, it's going to go back here. Well, it's going to check that condition again, and based on our logic, we're going to now go actually to the provisioning or the payment of that particular expense. If it's rejected, I'm going to change this to a terminate state. So we're going to make sure to terminate that instance. Now, if it goes in, once it checks for finance review, it's going to go to accounts payable. So I want to show you calling an automatic activity. So we're going to call a service action, which is send to accounts payable. Basically, this is an integration with an external system which will actually send this expense information to accounts payable legacy system in order to be paid to the employee. So we're going to call that action, and we're going to call this send to accounts payable. and we're going to be now waiting for that expense to be paid, and that external system is going to raise an event through a web service that we define, and we want to make sure that we receive the payment. So we're going to wait for payment, right? Or wait for that accounts payable to be processed, to be completed, however time it requires to be completed. And once it's completed, I am going to just go out and notify the employee through a action that we have, send notification. Once that's done, I'm basically done with the process. So make it a little smaller here. To go again, we're going to submit that expense. We're going to go to a manager review. We'll accept that. We're going to follow the happy path. We're going to accept that expense. Check for finance review. If it requires, it's going to go here. If it's approved, it's going to go back and follow the accounts payable path in order to be paid. So I'm going to publish that workflow. This is being compiled. It's being set up in its own container, and it will be deployed to our development environment. Perfect. So now it's been published. So let's go out to our application, and let's go out and add a new expense. So we're gonna go, this is a new computer for employee. It's gonna be $2,500. I'm gonna select myself as manager, and I'm gonna click save. All right, so notice we're in this review state. Let's go out to our workflow tab. Let's refresh. It's gonna open the expense workflow to view the details. I can see my revisions, and I can see the instance. Notice that instance 892 corresponds to expense 232, which is this one here that is running. All right, so let's open this instance and see where we are. Notice that it's in manager view, assigned to me. It executed this action, and it's waiting for that particular event to complete that activity. Let's go here. Let's accept this item. Let's go back to the instance and refresh. Great. So notice now it has moved into the finance review. It's waiting for that particular event, and it's assigned to the finance approver. I do have finance approver role assigned to me, so I'm just gonna open this up. We're gonna click approve, and we're gonna move that to the next step. And notice that it's still approved here. Right now, the workflow instance will, do its thing. It went back to this action, so it was approved. It went up to the particular state. Now it's on the accounts payable, waiting for payment. So let's refresh. Right, so now I can see we're in accounts payable. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have a legacy system. We're simulating an accounts payable system where I can look at the item and oh, perfect, I see that item and I can actually click process payment to in our ERP systems to pay that. So I'm gonna do so to kick off that process and go back to our instance and refresh. And now notice how payment was received. The automatic activity that I defined to notify the employee has been completed. Notice how for every activity you see the actions trigger and the terminate action. So our expense should be paid and notification should be sent to our email for payment. There we go. There's additional information that it's available as well, for the logs. So you can actually go into the logs of, particular instance. So if you click here, you can see additional logs for each particular instance of the instance and the activities and everything that was performed within that particular instance. So that concludes our video. If you have any questions or if you would like more information, please navigate to our website, OutSystems.com. Thank you.